What happens when the most powerful vampire in existence discovers that his beloved wife has been hiding a devastating medical secret? In a world where supernatural politics can destroy kingdoms overnight, Queen Elena has been branded useless by the Vampire Council for failing to produce an heir after 5 years of marriage. But when King Damien finally reads her private medical reports, the truth he uncovers will shake the very foundations of their immortal realm. This isn't just a story about love and betrayal. It's about a woman who sacrificed everything to protect her husband's throne, and a king who must choose between his crown and his heart. As ancient enemies circle like vultures and the council grows bolder in their demands, one medical file holds the power to either save their marriage or destroy an empire that has stood for over 1,000 years. The question isn't whether Queen Elena can give the king an heir. The question is whether King Damien can forgive himself for not knowing the truth sooner, and whether their love is strong enough to survive the storm that's coming. Some secrets are worth dying for, others are worth living for. But when you're immortal, the consequences of both can last forever. The grand throne room of the Shadowmere Castle fell silent as Queen Elena walked through the massive oak doors. Her emerald silk gown swept across the ancient stone floor, but even the whisper of fabric could not mask the tension that filled the air like thick smoke. Every vampire lord and lady in the council chamber turned their eyes toward her, their gazes sharp as daggers and twice as cutting. King Damien sat on his obsidian throne, his jaw clenched so tightly that Elena could see the muscle jumping beneath his pale skin. His dark hair fell across his forehead, partially hiding eyes that burned like red coals in the dim candlelight. At 28, he looked exactly as he had the day he was turned nearly 600 years ago. But tonight there was something different about him, something broken. "The Queen arrives," sneered Lord Blackwood, the eldest member of the council. His voice dripped with false courtesy as he rose from his seat, his ancient bones creaking like old wood. "How convenient. We were just discussing the future of our realm." Elena's spine straightened, but she kept her expression calm. She had learned long ago that showing weakness in front of the council was like bleeding in front of sharks. "Lord Blackwood," she acknowledged, with a slight nod. "Lords and ladies of the council." Lady Rosemary, a blonde vampire who looked no older than 20, but had lived for over 4 centuries, laughed softly. The sound was like breaking glass. "Tell me, Your Majesty, have you given any thought to our previous discussions about your responsibilities as queen?" The words hung in the air like a curse. Elena felt Damien's eyes on her, but she did not look at him. She could not bear to see the disappointment there, the same disappointment that had been growing stronger each month for the past 5 years. "I am well aware of my responsibilities," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "Are you?" Lord Blackwood stepped forward, his pale hands clasped behind his back. "Because from where we stand, it appears that you have failed in the most basic duty of any queen. You have been married to our king for 5 years, and still there is no heir." The accusation hit Eleanor like a physical blow, but she had heard it so many times that the pain had become a familiar companion. Around the room, other council members nodded in agreement, their faces showing varying degrees of disapproval and impatience. "The bloodline must continue," Lady Rosemary added, her voice taking on a false sweetness that made Elena's skin crawl. "Surely you understand how concerning the situation has become for all of us." Damien finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Enough." The single word carried the weight of absolute authority, and several council members actually took a step back. "You will not speak to my wife with such disrespect." "With respect, Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said, though his tone suggested anything but respect. "We are simply stating facts. The realm needs an heir. Without one, our bloodline dies with you. Without one, our enemies will see us as weak." "Weak?" Damien rose from his throne, his full height making him tower over everyone in the room. At 6'4", he was an imposing figure even among vampires, and when he was angry, the very air seemed to vibrate with his power. "You dare suggest that I am weak?" "Not you, my lord," Lady Rosemary said quickly. "Never you. But a kingdom without an heir is vulnerable. Our neighboring vampire clans are already whispering. They say that perhaps it is time for new leadership, younger blood." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. The council had never been this bold before, never so direct in their criticism. Something had changed, and she could sense that tonight was different from all their previous meetings. "What are you suggesting?" Damien's voice was deadly quiet. Lord Blackwood smiled, and Elena noticed that his fangs were slightly extended. We are suggesting that perhaps it is time to consider other options. There are many suitable vampire ladies who would be honored to serve as queen. Ladies who have already proven their ability to bear children. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. They were not just questioning her ability to produce an heir anymore. They were suggesting that Damien should replace her entirely. "You forget yourselves," Damien said, his voice now carrying a hint of the power that could reduce a full-grown vampire to ash. "Elena is my wife, my chosen queen, and she will remain so until the end of time. Anyone who suggests otherwise is welcome to test their strength against mine." The threat was clear, but Elena noticed that none of the council members looked particularly intimidated. That scared her more than anything else. The council had always been wary of Damien's power, always careful to show proper respect. If they were being this bold now, it meant they believed they had an advantage somehow. "Of course, Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said smoothly. "We would never dream of challenging your authority. We simply want what is best for the realm. And what is best is an heir. Time," Elena spoke up, surprising herself at the strength in her own voice. "All we need is more time." Lady Rosemary laughed again. "Time? My dear, you have had 5 years. How much more time could you possibly need? Unless—" She paused dramatically, her eyes glittering with malicious interest. "Unless there is something wrong with you? Some reason why you cannot fulfill your duties as a woman?" Elena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "There is nothing wrong with me." "Then surely you would not object to an examination," Lord Blackwood suggested. "We have several excellent physicians who could determine if there are any medical issues that might be preventing conception." "Absolutely not," Damien snapped. "My wife will not be subjected to such indignity." "It is not indignity, Your Majesty," Lady Rosemary said. "It is practicality. If there is a medical problem, perhaps it can be solved. If there is not," she shrugged elegantly, "then we must consider that perhaps the problem lies elsewhere." Elena knew exactly what the vampire lady meant. If the medical examination proved that Elena was physically capable of bearing children, then the council would argue that the problem was with Damien. They would question his virility, his strength, his worthiness to rule. It was a trap, cleverly laid and expertly sprung. "The decision is mine," Elena said quietly, "and I choose to undergo the examination." Damien turned to stare at her, his red eyes wide with shock. "Elena, no, you do not have to do this."
"Yes, I do."
She met his gaze for the first time since entering the throne room, and she hoped he could see the love in her eyes even as she prepared to walk into what might be her own destruction. "I do this for our kingdom, for our people, and for us." The examination was scheduled for the following morning, and Elena spent the night pacing her chambers like a caged wolf. Damien had tried to talk her out of it dozens of times, but she had remained firm in her decision. She could not tell him the real reason why the examination terrified her so much, because if she did, it would destroy him. The truth was that Elena had already been examined. Months ago, when she had first begun to suspect that something was wrong, she had secretly visited Dr. Morrison, the castle's head physician. The results of that examination were locked away in her private safe, a secret that she had carried like a stone in her chest for almost a year. As dawn broke over the castle, Elena stood before her mirror and stared at her reflection. At 26, she still looked like the young woman who had married the vampire king 5 years ago. Her long auburn hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes were still bright despite the sleepless night. She was beautiful by any standard, and she had been a good queen. She had modernized many of the castle's systems, had negotiated peace treaties with several neighboring clans, and had worked tirelessly to improve the lives of the vampires under Damien's rule. None of that would matter if she could not give him a child. The examination room was located in the castle's medical wing, a place that Elena had always avoided. The sterile white walls and the smell of antiseptic made her feel sick, but she forced herself to walk through the doors with her head held high. Dr. Morrison was waiting for her, along with 2 other physicians that the council had insisted on bringing in. Elena recognized Dr. Harding from the neighboring Nightfall clan, but the 3rd doctor was a stranger to her. "Your Majesty," Dr. Morrison said with a respectful bow, "I want you to know that this examination will be conducted with the utmost discretion and respect." Elena nodded, grateful that at least one familiar face would be in the room. Doctor! Morrison had been serving the royal family for over 2 centuries, and she trusted him more than the others. The examination itself was thorough and humiliating, but Elena endured it with the same stoic grace that had carried her through 5 years of council meetings and diplomatic functions. She answered their questions honestly, submitted to their tests without complaint, and tried not to think about what the results would mean for her future. When it was over, the 3 doctors retreated to a corner of the room to discuss their findings in hushed tones. Elena sat on the examination table, still wearing the thin hospital gown they had given her, and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. Finally, Doctor Morrison approached her, his expression grave. Your Majesty, we have completed our examination. And? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Physically, you are perfectly healthy. There is no medical reason why you should not be able to conceive and carry a child to term. The words hit Elena like a thunderbolt. She had known this moment would come, had dreaded it for months, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. I see, she managed to say. Dr. Harding stepped forward, his expression less sympathetic than Dr. Morrison's. Your Majesty, given these results, the Council will naturally want to know why you have not yet produced an heir. They may request that the King also submit to an examination. Eleanor's heart clenched. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. If Damien was examined, if the doctors discovered the truth about him, it would not just end their marriage. It could end his reign. That will not be necessary, she said quickly. I will speak to the Council myself. But Elena knew that speaking to the Council would not be enough. They had made their position clear. They wanted an heir, and they wanted one soon. If she could not provide it, they would find someone who could. That evening, Elena sat in her private study, staring at the locked safe that contained her secret medical files. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of the evening hunt beginning. Vampires were emerging from the castle to feed, their voices carrying on the night wind like whispers of death. She thought about Damien, about the way he had looked at her in the throne room when she had agreed to the examination. He had been so sure that she was sacrificing herself unnecessarily, so confident that the results would prove what he had always believed, that their inability to have children was simply bad luck, a temporary setback that would resolve itself in time. He had no idea that Elena had been lying to him for almost a year. He had no idea that she had already discovered the truth and that the truth was far worse than anything the Council suspected. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Elena look up from her thoughts. She recognized Damien's stride immediately, the confident pace of a man who had ruled kingdoms and commanded armies. But tonight, something about his footsteps sounded different. Heavier. More uncertain. He knocked on her door, though as her husband, he had no need to ask permission to enter her private chambers. Come in, she called softly. Damien entered the room, and Elena was struck by how tired he looked. His usual confidence seemed subdued, and there were lines of stress around his eyes that had not been there that morning. How are you feeling? He asked, crossing the room to sit beside her on the small couch near the fireplace. I am fine, Elena replied automatically. It was the same answer she had been giving for months, and they both knew it was a lie. Elena. Damien reached out and took her hand in his cool skin a comfort against her fevered thoughts. We need to talk about what happened today. There is nothing to discuss. The examination is over. The results are what they are. The results prove what I've always known, Damien said firmly. There is nothing wrong with you. The Council was wrong to doubt you, wrong to put you through that humiliation. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Damien, I know what you are thinking, he continued. I know you are worried about what the Council will do next, but you do not need to worry. I will protect you, no matter what they threaten. You cannot protect me from this, Elena whispered. No one can. Damien's grip on her hand tightened. What do you mean? Elena looked into his eyes, those beautiful red eyes that had captured her heart from the moment they first met, and she felt her resolve wavering. She had kept her secret for so long, had carried the burden alone for months, but suddenly the weight of it seemed too much to bear. There is something I need to tell you, she said slowly. Something I should have told you long ago. But before she could continue, a loud commotion erupted from somewhere deep within the castle. Shouts echoed through the stone corridors, followed by the sound of running feet and slamming doors. Damien was on his feet instantly, his supernatural hearing picking up details that Elena's human ears could not. His expression darkened, and she saw his fangs extend slightly. What is it?
Elena asked, rising to stand beside him.
Intruders, Damien said grimly.
The Blood Moon clan has breached our borders. Elena felt her blood turn to ice. The Blood Moon clan had been their enemies for over 3 centuries, ever since a territorial dispute had escalated into open warfare. They were known for their brutality and their complete lack of honor in battle. Why would they attack now? Elena asked. But even as the words left her mouth, she realized she already knew the answer. The council's very public questioning of the royal marriage had been seen as a sign of weakness. Their enemies were moving to take advantage of what they perceived as a vulnerable moment. Damien was already moving toward the door, his mind clearly shifting into battle mode, but he paused at the threshold and turned back to look at Elena.
"We will finish our conversation later," he said. "Whatever you need to tell me, it can wait until this threat is dealt with."
Elena nodded, but she knew that by the time this crisis was over, the moment for truth-telling might have passed.
The attack would only reinforce the council's belief that the kingdom needed an heir, needed stability, needed a queen who could secure the future of their bloodline. As Damien disappeared into the corridor to rally his forces, Elena sank back onto the couch and stared at her locked safe. Inside those files was the truth that could save her marriage or destroy it completely. The truth that could protect Damien's throne or bring down his entire kingdom. The truth that she was not the one who was unable to have children. The battle raged for 3 days and 3 nights, turning the usually peaceful grounds of Shadowmere Castle into a blood-soaked battlefield. Elena watched from the tower windows as Damien led his forces against the Blood Moon clan, his sword cutting through enemies like a silver flame in the darkness. She had seen him fight before, but never with such desperate fury, never with the weight of a kingdom's survival on his shoulders. On the 4th morning, the last of the Blood Moon soldiers retreated into the forest, leaving behind a trail of ash and destruction. Damien's forces had won, but the victory felt hollow. Everyone in the castle knew that this attack was just the beginning. Word of the royal couple's fertility struggles had spread beyond their borders, and other enemies would soon follow. Elena found Damien in his private armory, methodically cleaning blood from his sword. His clothes were torn and stained, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion beyond anything sleep could cure. When he looked up at her, she saw something in his expression that made her heart ache. "How many did we lose?" she asked quietly. 43 of our people, Damien replied, his voice hollow, including Marcus and young William from the kitchen staff. Elena closed her eyes. Marcus had been with them for over 50 years, a gentle vampire who had taken care of the castle gardens with the devotion of a true artist. William had been turned only 2 years ago, barely more than a child in vampire terms. "This is my fault," she whispered. Damien's head snapped up. "No. Do not even think that. It is true, and you know it." Elena moved closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "They attacked because they see us as weak. They see our marriage as unstable. If I could give you an heir, stop." Damien's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I will not have you blame yourself for the actions of our enemies." But Elena could see the truth in his eyes, even if he would not speak it aloud. The attack had shaken him more than he would admit. For the first time in his long reign, he was facing challenges that could not be solved with strength or strategy alone. "The council has called an emergency meeting," Damien said, setting down his sword and turning to face her fully. "They want to discuss new security measures." Elena nodded, but she knew that security was not the only thing the council wanted to discuss. They would use this attack as proof of their arguments, evidence that the kingdom's apparent weakness was inviting aggression from all sides. "Before we go to the meeting," Elena said, gathering her courage, "I need to tell you something. Something important." Damien studied her face, and she could see him noting the tension in her expression, the way her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "What is it?" Elena opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. How could she tell him? How could she explain that everything he believed about their situation was wrong? "Elena," Damien said gently, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. We have been married for 5 years. There is nothing you could say that would change how I feel about you." The tenderness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. She had always known that Damien loved her, had never doubted it for a moment, that love and political necessity were 2 very different things, and she was not sure that even his love would be enough to overcome what she was about to reveal. "The medical examination yesterday," she began slowly. "Dr. Morrison said that I am perfectly healthy, that there is no reason I should not be able to conceive. I know, and that is what I have always believed. Damien's thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheeks. The council was wrong to doubt you. But what if they were not wrong? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if there really is a problem, but not with me? She saw the exact moment when understanding dawned in Damien's eyes. His hand stilled against her face, and his expression shifted from confusion to something that might have been fear. What are you saying? He asked carefully. Elena pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. I am saying that I have known the truth for almost a year. I had my own medical examination months before yesterday's council ordered one. And the results? The results were not what we hoped. Damien stared at her, his supernatural stillness making him look like a statue carved from marble. You have known for a year, he repeated slowly, and you said nothing. I could not. The words came out in a rush as if a dam had finally burst inside her chest. I could not tell you because I knew what it would mean. I knew how it would destroy you. Tell me, Damien said, his voice deadly quiet. Tell me everything. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the courtyard where servants were already working to clear away the debris from the battle. She could not look at Damien while she spoke, could not bear to see the hope die in his eyes. Doctor, Morrison ran extensive tests, she said. Blood work, physical examinations, even some experimental procedures that he had learned from human doctors. Everything came back normal. More than normal, actually. He said that I should be one of the most fertile women he had ever examined. Behind her, she heard Damien draw in a sharp breath, but he did not speak. So he started asking questions, Elena continued, about our intimate life, about timing, about things that I had never thought to consider important. And that is when he suggested that perhaps the problem was not with me. Elena, Damien's voice carried a warning, as if he could stop the truth by refusing to hear it.
He explained that male fertility is much more complex than most people realize,
Elena said, forcing herself to continue despite the pain in her husband's voice, especially in vampires.
The transformation that grants us immortality also affects our reproductive systems in ways that are not fully understood. She turned around then, needing to see his face, needing to gauge his reaction to what she was about to tell him. Dr. Morrison suggested that you undergo your own examination, she said, but I knew you would never agree to it. You would see it as a challenge to your masculinity, to your worthiness as a king. So I found another way. Damien's eyes narrowed. What did you do? I collected samples, Elena said, her cheeks burning with embarrassment even as she forced herself to continue. From our bed sheets, from your personal items. I gave them to Dr. Morrison without telling him where they came from, and I swore him to secrecy. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could see Damien processing her words, understanding the full scope of her deception. She had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible, had lied to him for months, had allowed him to believe that their childless state was simply bad luck. What did the test show? Damien asked finally, his voice so quiet that even her enhanced vampire hearing could barely pick up the words. Elena felt tears spilled on her cheeks. You are sterile, Damien. The vampire transformation damaged your reproductive system beyond repair. You can never father children. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Elena watched as her husband, the mighty vampire king who had never lost a battle and never backed down from a challenge, slowly sank into a chair, as if his legs could no longer support his weight. You have known this for a year, he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. And you said nothing. I could not, Elena repeated desperately. Can you not see why? If the council knew the truth, if our enemies knew, they would use it to destroy you. They would claim that you are not fit to rule, that your bloodline ends with you, that the kingdom needs a new king. So you chose to let them blame you instead, Damien said. You let them call you useless, let them question your worth as a woman and as a queen, rather than reveal the truth about me.
Yes, Elena whispered. Because I love you.
Because I would rather sacrifice my own reputation than see yours destroyed. Damien laughed then, but it was a sound completely devoid of humor. Do you realize what you have done? Do you understand the position you have put us both in? Elena felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. What do you mean? The council will demand answers, Damien said, rising from his chair and beginning to pace the room like a caged predator. Yesterday's examination proved that you are fertile. They will want to know why. If there is nothing wrong with you, we still have no children after 5 years of marriage. We can tell them that we need more time. Time? Damien turned to stare at her, his eyes blazing with an emotion that Elena could not identify.
After what just happened? After our enemies attacked us because they see our childless state as weakness?
The council will not accept any more delays. Elena felt her world beginning to crumble around her.
Then what do you suggest we do?
There is only one option, Damien said, his voice heavy with resignation.
I must submit to my own medical examination.
I must allow the doctors to discover the truth. No, Elena said immediately. We cannot. If they learn that you are sterile, if they realize that you can never produce an heir, then they will demand that I step down, Damien finished. They will insist that the throne pass to someone who can continue the bloodline. The two of them stared at each other across the room, both understanding the impossible situation they found themselves in. If Damien revealed the truth about his condition, he would lose his throne. But if he did not, the council would eventually grow tired of waiting and would find other ways to ensure the kingdom's future. There might be another way, Elena said slowly, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Damien looked at her skeptically. What are you thinking? What if the problem is not permanent? Elena asked. What if we could find a cure? Elena, the doctors said that the damage was irreversible. Human doctors, Elena corrected. What about magical healing? What about the ancient remedies that were used before modern medicine? Damien shook his head. Those are myths, Elena. Fairy tales told by vampires who refuse to accept the limitations of their condition. But Elena could see a spark of something in his eyes, something that might have been hope. What if they are not myths? What if there really are ways to reverse the damage caused by the vampire transformation? Even if such methods existed, Damien said carefully, they would be incredibly dangerous. The old magic comes with a price, always, and the price is usually higher than anyone wants to pay. Elena moved closer to him, her eyes bright with desperate determination. What if I was willing to pay that price? What if we both were? Damien reached out and grasped her shoulders, his grip almost painful in its intensity. Elena, listen to me. You cannot risk your life chasing after legends and fairy tales. And you cannot risk your throne by revealing the truth, Elena replied. Not yet. Not until we have explored every other option. They were interrupted by a sharp knock on the armory door. A moment later, Thomas, Damien's most trusted advisor, entered the room with a grave expression on his weathered face. Your Majesties, he said with a bow.
The council is ready to convene. They are quite eager to discuss the results of yesterday's examination.
Elena and Damien exchanged a look, both understanding that they were about to walk into a room full of vampires who smelled blood in the water.
The council had been questioning Elena's fitness as queen for months, and now they had medical proof that the problem was not with her fertility. They would want answers, and they would not be satisfied with vague promises of patience and time. Tell them we will be there shortly, Damien said. After Thomas left, Elena turned to her husband with pleading eyes. Promise me something, she said. Promise me that you will not reveal the truth about your condition. Not yet. Give me time to research the old magic, to see if there might be another solution.
Damien studied her face for a long moment. And if there is no other solution? If the old magic proves to be nothing more than wishful thinking? Then we will face the truth together, Elena said.
But please just give me a chance to try. Finally, Damien nodded. 1 month, he said. I will give you 1 month to research your magical cures. But if you find nothing, if there is no real hope of a solution, then I will tell the council the truth about my condition. Helena felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over her. 1 month was not very long to find a cure for something that the best doctors in the kingdom had declared irreversible. But it was better than nothing, and it was enough time to at least try. Thank you, she whispered, rising up on her toes to kiss him softly. When they broke apart, Damien's expression was serious. Elena, I need you to understand something. Even if you find a cure, even if we somehow manage to overcome this problem, things between us will never be the same. What do you mean? You lied to me for a year, Damien said quietly. You let me believe that our childless state was simply bad luck, when all along you knew the truth. You made decisions about our marriage, about our future, without consulting me. That is not something I can simply forgive and forget. Elena felt her heart shatter at his words. She had saved his secret, had protected his throne, had sacrificed her own reputation to preserve his.
But in doing so, she had also betrayed his trust in the most fundamental way possible. "I was trying to protect you," she said weakly. "I know," Damien replied. "And that is the only reason I am giving you this month to find a solution. But Elena, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that even if you save my throne, you might not be able to save our marriage." With that devastating statement hanging in the air between them, Damien left the armory to prepare for the council meeting. Elena remained behind, staring at the sword that still lay on the table, its blade gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. She had thought that the hardest part would be keeping Damien secret. She had not realized that the real challenge would be living with the consequences of her choice to protect him. In trying to save their kingdom, she might have lost the only thing that truly mattered to her, Damien's love and trust. But she would not give up. Not yet. Somewhere in the vast library of Shadowmere Castle, somewhere in the ancient texts the previous generations of vampire royalty had collected, there had to be an answer. There had to be a way to undo the damage that had been done, both to Damien's body and to their marriage. As Elena made her way to the library to begin her research, she could not know that her search for a magical cure would lead her down a path far darker and more dangerous than anything she had imagined. She could not know that the old magic she sought came with a price that would test the very foundations of everything she believed about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. All she knew was that she had 1 month to find a miracle, and she intended to use every moment of it. The council meeting was everything Elena had feared it would be, and worse. Lord Blackwood and Lady Rosemary took turns dissecting the results of her medical examination with the precision of surgeons and the cruelty of executioners. They spoke about her fertility as if she were a prize-breeding mare, discussing her hormonal levels and reproductive capacity with clinical detachment that made Elena's skin crawl. The examination proves conclusively that Her Majesty is physically capable of bearing children, Dr. Harding announced to the assembled council members, his voice carrying throughout the great hall. "There are no abnormalities, no deficiencies, no medical reasons why conception should not occur." A murmur rippled through the room, and Elena could feel the weight of dozens of vampire gazes pressing down on her. She sat beside Damien's throne, maintaining perfect posture despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to explain that the problem was not what they thought, but she had promised Damien that she would remain silent. "Then we must ask ourselves," Lord Blackwood said, rising from his seat with theatrical gravity, "why our queen remains childless after 5 years of marriage to our virile young king." Elena felt Damien tense beside her. She knew that he wanted to speak, wanted to defend her against the council's increasingly bold accusations, but they had agreed that any defensive responses would only make the situation worse. "Perhaps," Lady Rosemary suggested with false sweetness, "the problem is not medical but behavioral. Perhaps Her Majesty has been taking steps to prevent conception." The accusation hit the room like a thunderclap. Several council members gasped audibly, and Elena heard at least one elderly vampire hiss in shock. The suggestion that a queen would deliberately prevent herself from bearing the kingdom's heir was tantamount to treason. "That is enough," Damien said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "I will not sit here and listen to you accuse my wife of betraying her crown and country." "Then what explanation do you offer, Your Majesty?" Lord Blackwood asked, his pale eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Your queen is healthy and fertile. You are young and strong. Yet after 5 years, there is no heir. Surely you can understand our concern." Elena watched Damien's jaw clench, saw the muscle jumping beneath his skin as he fought to control his temper. She knew that he was thinking about their conversation in the armory, about the medical files hidden in her private safe, about the truth that could destroy his reign if it ever came to light.
"Some things cannot be forced," Damien said finally.
"Some blessings come in their own time." "Time?" Lady Rosemary laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls like breaking glass. "Your Majesty, with respect, time is a luxury that our kingdom can no longer afford. The attack by the Blood Moon clan proves that our enemies see us as vulnerable. They smell weakness, and they are moving to exploit it. The Blood Moon clan attacked because they are opportunistic cowards," Damien replied coldly. "Not because of any perceived weakness in our royal line." "Are you so certain?" Lord Blackwood asked. "Because we have received intelligence that suggests otherwise. Our spies report that several neighboring clans are forming alliances, preparing for what they believe will be the inevitable collapse of the Shadowmere dynasty." Elena felt her blood turn to ice. What alliances? The Crimson Court has reached out to the Nightshade clan, Lady Rosemary explained, her voice dripping with false concern.
They have also been in contact with the Silver Moon Coven and the Blood Rose Syndicate, 4 of our most powerful neighbors, all united by the belief that our kingdom is ripe for conquest.
The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could see the fear in the faces of the younger council members, could smell the tension that filled the air like smoke from a funeral pyre.
4 clans working together represented a force that could overwhelm even Shadowmere's considerable defenses. When? Damien asked quietly. Soon, Lord Blackwood replied. Perhaps within the next few months. They are waiting to see how we respond to the recent attack, waiting to gauge whether our resolve has been weakened by our domestic difficulties.
Elena understood the implication immediately.
The enemy clans were not just waiting to see if Shadowmere would recover from the Blood Moon attack, they were waiting to see if the royal marriage would produce an heir, if the kingdom would gain the stability that came with a secured succession. What do you propose we do? Damien asked, though Elena could tell from his tone that he already knew what the council would suggest. We need an heir, Lady Rosemary said bluntly. Not next year, not in 5 years, now. The kingdom needs to know that the royal line will continue, that Shadowmere will endure beyond your reign. And if conception does not occur naturally, Damien's voice was deadly quiet. Then perhaps it is time to consider other options, Lord Blackwood said carefully. There are precedents in vampire law for situations like this. When a royal marriage proves unfruitful, there are steps that can be taken to ensure the continuation of the bloodline. Eleanor felt her world tilt on its axis. She knew exactly what Lord Blackwood was suggesting, had seen it happen in other vampire kingdoms when political necessity overrode personal desires. A king could set aside a barren queen and marry a more fertile woman, ensuring that his bloodline continued even if his first marriage ended in dissolution. You are suggesting that I divorce my wife, Damien said, his words falling into the silence like stones into a deep well. We are suggesting that you consider all available options, Lady Rosemary replied smoothly. Your Majesty's personal happiness, while important, cannot be allowed to compromise the security of the kingdom. Elena wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself and her marriage, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. How could she argue against their logic when she knew that they were right? How could she claim that her presence as queen was beneficial to the kingdom when she could not fulfill the most basic requirement of her position? I need time to consider your suggestions, Damien said finally. Of course, Lord Blackwood agreed, but your Majesty should know that time is not a luxury we possess in abundance. Our enemies grow bolder with each passing day, and our people grow more anxious about the future of their kingdom. As the council meeting dissolved and the various lords and ladies filed out of the great hall, Elena remained seated beside Damien's throne, her mind racing with the implications of everything she had heard. 4 enemy clans forming an alliance. Attacks planned within months. A kingdom growing desperate for the stability that only an heir could provide. We need to talk, Damien said quietly, his voice barely audible even to her enhanced hearing. They made their way back to Elena's private study in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When the door closed behind them, Elena finally allowed her carefully maintained composure to crumble. They want you to divorce me, she said, sinking into her chair like a woman much older than her 26 years. The council wants many things, Damien replied. That does not mean I will give them what they want. But they are not wrong, Elena said, forcing herself to voice the thoughts that had been tormenting her for months. I cannot give you an heir. I cannot secure the future of your bloodline. From a political standpoint, divorcing me would be the logical choice. Damien crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing her own pain reflected in those red depths that had once seemed so warm and loving. I did not marry you for political reasons, Damien said firmly. I married you because I love you. Because you are the strongest, most intelligent, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Because you make me want to be a better king and a better man. Love will not save the kingdom, Elena whispered. Love will not stop our enemies from attacking. Love will not give our people the security they need. No, Damien agreed, but love is what makes the kingdom worth saving in the first place. Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot against her cool skin. What are we going to do? We have less than a month before you promised to reveal the truth about your condition, and now the council is actively discussing dissolution of our marriage. Even if I find a magical cure for your sterility, it could take months or years to work.
I do not know, Damien admitted. But we will figure something out. We have to.
Elena pulled her hands free from his grasp and moved to the locked safe that contained her medical files. With trembling fingers, she input the combination and withdrew the folder that had haunted her dreams for almost a year. Before we can find a solution, she said, you need to see the complete medical report. You need to understand exactly what we are dealing with. Damien took the folder from her hands, his expression grave. As he read through Dr. Morrison's detailed analysis, Elena watched his face change from hope to confusion to despair. The damage is extensive, he said finally, his voice hollow. Dr. Morrison describes it as complete cellular necrosis of the reproductive organs. According to this, even if there were a magical cure, the affected tissue would need to be completely regenerated. That is why I've been researching the old magic, Elena explained. Not just healing spells or fertility potions, but transformation magic, the kind of power that could rebuild damaged organs from the cellular level up. Damien looked up from the medical report, his eyes bright with a mixture of hope and fear. Elena, that kind of magic, it has not been practiced in centuries. Most scholars believe it was lost forever when the Great Purge destroyed the ancient covens. Most scholars, Elena agreed, but not all. I have been corresponding with Dr. Evelyn Cross, a researcher at the University of Edinburgh who specializes in pre-medieval vampire magic. She believes that some of the old texts survived the Purge, hidden away in private collections and forgotten libraries.
And she thinks these texts might contain regeneration spells? She thinks they might, Elena said carefully.
But she also warned me that such magic comes with significant risks.
The spells require enormous amounts of energy, often drawn from multiple sources. Sometimes the caster pays with their life force. Sometimes the recipient does. Damien set down the medical report and moved to stare out the window at the castle grounds. In the distance, Elena could see workers still clearing debris from the recent battle, a stark reminder of the dangers that surrounded them. Even if we could find such magic, Damien said slowly, even if we could make it work, the council would still want explanations. They would want to know why my fertility suddenly returned after years of problems. We could claim that it was a delayed reaction to your vampire transformation, Elena suggested.
That your body needed time to fully adjust to immortality before your reproductive system could function properly. Do you think they would believe such an explanation?
I think they would want to believe it, Elena replied.
The alternative would be admitting that their king was flawed, and that would undermine their own authority as members of his council.
Damien turned back to face her, his expression thoughtful. You said that Dr. Sura...
Cross believes some of the old texts might have survived. Do we know where they are? Elena felt her heart rate increase as she prepared to share the most dangerous part of her research. According to Dr. Pegmar, Cross, there are 3 possible locations. The first is the Vatican Library, but accessing their restricted archives would be nearly impossible. The second is a private collection owned by a reclusive vampire lord in Romania. And the third, Elena took a deep breath, the Midnight Archives in Prague, the largest collection of forbidden magical texts in Eastern Europe. Damien's eyes widened. Elena, the Midnight Archives are controlled by the Shadow Council. They are our enemies, have been for over 2 centuries. Entering their territory would be an act of war. Not if we went in secret, Elena said quickly. Not if we made it look like a personal research trip, something unrelated to our political situation. You want us to sneak into enemy territory, break into one of the most heavily guarded magical libraries in the world, and steal ancient texts that may or may not contain the spells we need. Damien's voice was incredulous. I want us to try, Elena said firmly. I want us to exhaust every possible option before we give up and accept defeat. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly wrestling with the impossibility of what she was suggesting. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression that was equal parts love and desperation. If we do this, he said slowly, if we attempt to break into the Midnight Archives, we would be risking everything, not just our lives, but our kingdom. If we were caught, if our enemies realized what we were doing, it would give them all the excuse they need to launch a full-scale invasion. I know, Elena whispered. And if we succeed, if we actually manage to find and perform these regeneration spells, there is no guarantee that they will work. We could sacrifice everything for a cure that proves to be nothing more than wishful thinking. I know that too. Damien moved closer to her, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. And you still want to try?
I still want to try, Elena confirmed, because the alternative is watching everything we have built together crumble to dust. Because I cannot bear the thought of losing you, losing our kingdom, losing everything that matters to us, without at least attempting to fight back. For a long moment they stood together in the gathering twilight, both understanding that they were about to embark on a journey that would either save their marriage and kingdom or destroy them both completely.
When would we leave?
Damien asked finally. As soon as possible, Elena replied. Dr. Cross believes that the Shadow Council will be distracted by their own internal politics for the next few weeks. If we are going to attempt this, now is our best chance. And our absence? How do we explain leaving Shadowmere at such a critical time? Elena had already thought of that. We tell the Council that we are making a diplomatic visit to our allies in Western Europe, that we are seeking support against the Four-Clan Alliance. They will want to send escorts, advisors. We refuse them, Elena said. We claim that the mission is too sensitive for a large party, that discretion is more important than ceremony. Damien nodded slowly. It could work. The Council would not be happy about it, but they could not openly object to an attempt to secure military support. Then you will do it? Elena asked, hardly daring to hope. You will come with me to Prague. Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. I will come with you, he said softly. Not because I believe we will succeed, but because I cannot bear the thought of losing you without trying everything possible to save what we have. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself to sink into his embrace, drawing strength from his warmth and his presence. She knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous beyond anything they had ever attempted. She knew that the odds of success were slim at best. But for the first time in months, she also felt something that had been absent from her life for far too long. Hope. They might fail. They might die in the attempt. But at least they would be fighting for their love and their kingdom, rather than simply waiting for both to slip away. Prague at midnight was a city transformed. The ancient cobblestone streets glistened with recent rain, and fog rolled through the narrow alleys like ghostly fingers seeking secrets in the darkness. Elena pulled her black cloak closer as she and Damien made their way through the old town, their footsteps eerily silent despite the wet stones beneath their feet. They had been traveling for 3 days, using a combination of modern transportation and ancient vampire speed to cross Europe while avoiding the territories controlled by their enemies. The official story was that they were conducting diplomatic meetings in London and Paris, building support for a coalition against the Four-Clan Alliance. In reality, they had spent most of their time researching the layout of Prague's magical district and planning their infiltration of the Midnight Archives. The entrance should be just ahead, Elena whispered, consulting the hand-drawn map that Dr. Cubb's history Cross had provided through encrypted channels. 3 blocks north of the astronomical clock, in the basement of what appears to be an abandoned bookshop. Damien nodded, his enhanced senses scanning the surrounding area for potential threats. Prague was technically neutral territory, but that did not mean it was safe for them. The Shadow Council had agents throughout the city, and their presence would not go unnoticed for long. As they turned the corner onto a narrow side street, Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. The bookshop stood exactly where Dr. Cross had indicated, its windows dark and dusty, its wooden sign hanging crooked from rusted chains. But there was something else, something that made the hair on the back of Elena's neck stand on end. Do you feel that? She asked quietly. Magic, Damien confirmed, his voice tight with tension. Old magic, powerful magic. And something else. They approached the shop carefully, noting the way the very air seemed to thicken around the building. Elena could taste copper in her mouth, could feel static electricity making her skin tingle. Whatever lay beneath this innocent-looking bookshop, it was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The front door was locked, but that posed no real obstacle to 2 vampires with supernatural strength. Damien carefully forced the old lock, trying to avoid any obvious signs of break-in. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow room filled with dusty shelves and books that looked like they had not been disturbed in decades. The entrance to the archive should be behind the counter, Elena said, moving carefully through the cramped space. Cross set to look for a hidden panel marked with the symbol of the Shadow Council. They searched for several minutes before Damien found what they were looking for. A small wooden panel, carved with an intricate design that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. The symbol of the Shadow Council, a silver crescent moon pierced by 3 daggers, was barely visible in the dim light. This is it, Damien said. Are you ready? Elena nodded, though her heart was racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They had come so far, risked so much,
and now they were finally at the threshold of either salvation or destruction. Damien pressed his hand against the symbol, and Elena felt the world shift around them. The floor beneath their feet became translucent, then disappeared entirely, and they found themselves falling through darkness toward a faint glow far below. They landed in a vast underground chamber that defied all logic in architecture. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Shelves lined the walls in spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly, filled with books and scrolls and artifacts that radiated power like heat from a forge. "Welcome to the Midnight Archives," a voice said from the darkness, and Elena spun around to find herself face to face with a figure in a flowing black robe. The person's face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but Elena could see pale hands emerging from the sleeves, hands that bore the distinctive marks of very old vampire magic. "We are here as researchers," Elena said quickly, hoping that their cover story would hold. "We seek knowledge about pre-medieval transformation magic." The robed figure laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Oh, my dear Queen Elena, did you really think you could enter my domain without my knowledge? Did you believe that your little deception would fool the Shadow Council?" Elena felt Damien tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively toward the sword concealed beneath his coat. They had been discovered, their mission compromised before it had truly begun. "Allow me to introduce myself," the figure continued, pulling back their hood to reveal a face that was both beautiful and terrible. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with sharp cheekbones and silver hair that fell in waves to her shoulders. But her eyes were ancient, older than anything Elena had ever seen, and they glowed with a pale blue light that seemed to pierce straight through to the soul. "I am Countess Morgana Blackthorn, Chief Archivist of the Midnight Collection and senior member of the Shadow Council. And you, your majesties, are either very brave or very foolish to come here seeking what you seek." "You know why we are here?" Damien asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Of course I know," Morgana replied. "The great vampire king, reduced to sneaking through my archives like a common thief, all because he cannot give his beloved wife the one thing that would secure their throne. It is quite romantic in a tragic sort of way." Elena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Their most private secret, the shame that they had hidden from even their closest advisors, was apparently common knowledge among their enemies. "If you know why we are here," Elena said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "then you know that we are desperate. Desperate enough to make a deal."
Morgana raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow.
"A deal? How interesting. And what, pray tell, do you have to offer that could possibly entrust the Shadow Council?" Elena and Damien exchanged a look. They had discussed this possibility during their journey, had prepared for the chance that they might be discovered and forced to negotiate. "Information," Damien said. "We know about the Four-Clan Alliance. We know their plans, their timeline, their intended targets." "Ah, yes, the Alliance," Morgana said with amusement. "You mean the coalition that my own Shadow Council helped to organize? The military alliance that we have been planning for months as part of our strategy to destabilize your kingdom?" Elena felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. The Shadow Council was not just aware of the Four-Clan Alliance. They were behind it. They had been orchestrating Shadowmere's destruction from the beginning. "Surprised?" Morgana asked, clearly enjoying their shock. "Did you really think that 4 vampire clans would spontaneously decide to work together? Vampire politics do not work that way, as you well know." "What do you want?" Damien asked bluntly. "What is your price for helping us?" Morgana smiled, and Elena caught a glimpse of fangs that were longer and sharper than normal vampire teeth. "My price is simple, Your Majesty. I want your throne." The words echoed through the vast chamber like a death sentence. Elena understood immediately what the Countess was proposing. Help them find a cure for Damien's sterility. Allow them to produce an heir and stabilize their kingdom, and then step aside to let the Shadow Council take control.
"You want us to hand over Shadowmere to our enemies?" Elena said.
"I want you to hand over Shadowmere to superior leadership," Morgana corrected. "The Shadow Council has governed vampire territories for over 500 years. We understand the complexities of immortal politics in a way that your little kingdom never could." "And if we refuse?" Damien asked. "Then you leave here empty-handed," Morgana replied with a shrug. "You return to Shadowmere to face your council's demands for an heir, knowing that you can never provide one.
You watch as the Four-Clan Alliance destroys your borders and your people, and eventually, you lose everything anyway, but without the dignity of having made a choice.
Elena felt despair wash over her like a tide of ice water. They had risked everything to come here, had pinned all their hopes on finding a magical cure for Damien's condition.
But the price for that cure was the very thing they were trying to save, their kingdom. There must be another way, Elena said desperately.
Some other price you would accept. Oh, there is, Morgana said, her eyes glittering with malicious interest. There is one other option, though I doubt you will find it more appealing than the first.
What is it?
Damien demanded. Morgana began to pace around them in a slow circle, her black robes flowing like liquid shadow. The magic you seek, the regeneration spells that could cure your problem, they require a tremendous amount of life force. More than any single person can provide and survive. How much life force? Elena asked, though she was beginning to suspect that she did not want to know the answer.
Enough to kill an ordinary vampire, Morgana explained casually. The spells literally steal years from the donor's life, transferring that vital energy to fuel the regeneration process.
For a young, healthy vampire, it might cost 50 or 60 years of immortality. Elena did some quick calculations in her head. At 26, she had theoretically been immortal for only 5 years, since the day of her vampire transformation. Even if she survived the process, she would emerge from it significantly aged, possibly centuries older in terms of her supernatural development. But there is a catch, Morgana continued. The donor must be someone with a deep emotional connection to the recipient.
Love, you see, amplifies the magical resonance. Without that connection, the spell simply will not work.
Elena understood immediately what the Countess was suggesting.
The only way to cure Damien's sterility was for Elena herself to serve as the donor, sacrificing decades of her own immortal life to fuel the regeneration magic.
You want me to give up years of my life to cure my husband, Elena said slowly. I want you to choose, Morgana replied.
Your throne or your husband's virility, your kingdom or your marriage. You cannot have both. The silence that followed was deafening.
Elena could hear her own heartbeat echoing through the vast chamber, could feel Damien's tension radiating from his body like heat. How many years? Damien asked quietly.
How many years of Elena's life would the spell require?
Difficult to say precisely, Morgana admitted. The old texts are not entirely clear on the specifics, but I would estimate between 50 and 75 years of immortal life force. Elena felt dizzy at the magnitude of what was being asked. 50 to 75 years was not just time, it was entire centuries of experiences, of memories, of the simple joy of existing alongside the person she loved most in the world. And there is no guarantee that the spell would work? Elena asked. Magic is never guaranteed, Morgana said with a shrug. The spells are ancient and complex. There is always a chance that something could go wrong, that the transfer of life force could be incomplete or corrupted. Meaning what? Meaning that you could sacrifice decades of your immortal life and still end up with a husband who cannot father children, Morgana explained bluntly.
Or worse, you could die in the attempt, leaving him alone and sterile and facing the collapse of his kingdom. Elena looked at Damien, seeing her own anguish reflected in his red eyes. They had known that their journey to Prague would be dangerous, but neither of them had imagined facing this kind of choice.
Sacrifice their kingdom to their enemies or sacrifice Elena's immortal life force to an uncertain magical cure. I need time to think, Elena said.
Of course, Morgana agreed, but not too much time. The Shadow Council's patience is not unlimited, and the Four-Clan Alliance will not wait forever for your kingdom to provide them with an opportunity to attack. How long do we have? Damien asked. 3 days, Morgana replied. Return here in 3 days with your decision. Choose to hand over your throne, and I will ensure that you both live comfortable lives as honored guests of the Shadow Council. Choose to attempt the regeneration magic, and I will provide you with the necessary texts and ritual components. And if we choose neither option? Morgana's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Then you leave here as you arrived, with nothing. And the Shadow Council will proceed with our original plan to destroy your kingdom and absorb its territories into our own domain. As if on cue, the chamber began to shift and change around them. The shelves and their impossible contents started to fade, becoming translucent and then disappearing entirely.
Elena felt the ground becoming insubstantial beneath her feet, and suddenly she and Damien were rising through the darkness, traveling back toward the bookshop above.
They found themselves standing in the dusty shop, the hidden panel once again sealed and ordinary-looking. Outside, Prague continued its nighttime existence, unaware that the fate of an entire vampire kingdom was being decided in the magical depths beneath the city.
"We should go," Damien said quietly.
"We need time to discuss our options without the risk of being overheard." They made their way back through the winding streets to the small hotel where they were staying, moving in silence as they both processed the impossible choice they had been given. Elena felt numb, as if her mind was refusing to fully comprehend the magnitude of what Morgana had proposed. Back in their hotel room, Damien paced by the window while Elena sat on the bed, staring at her hands and trying to imagine what it would feel like to give up decades of immortal life. "We could return to Shadowmere," Damien said suddenly. "We could tell the council the truth about my condition and accept whatever consequences come." "The consequences would be the destruction of everything we have built," Elena replied. "The loss of your throne, the collapse of our kingdom, the deaths of our people when the Four-Clan Alliance attacks.
And the alternative is either handing our kingdom over to our enemies or asking you to sacrifice most of your immortal life for a spell that might not even work," Damien said, his voice heavy with despair.
"How can I ask you to make that choice?" Elena looked up at him. This man who had been the center of her world for 5 years, who had loved her enough to defy his own counsel and risk his throne for the chance to save their marriage. "You are not asking," she said softly. "I am choosing." Damien stopped pacing and turned to stare at her. "Eleanor, I have already made my decision," she continued, rising from the bed to face him. "I will undergo the regeneration spell. I will give up whatever years of my life are necessary to cure your sterility and save our kingdom." "No," Damien said immediately. "Absolutely not. I will not allow you to sacrifice yourself for my sake." "It is not just for your sake," Elena replied firmly. "It is for our people, for our kingdom, for the life we have built together. And it is not sacrifice. It is investment. If the spell works, we will have centuries together to build a family and rule our kingdom. If it does not work, at least we will have tried." Damien crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly that she could barely breathe. "I cannot lose you," he whispered against her hair. "I would rather give up my throne than lose you. And I would rather give up years of my immortal life than lose everything we have built together," Elena replied. "We are partners, Damien. We face these challenges together, or we do not face them at all." For a long moment, they held each other in the quiet hotel room, both understanding that they were about to embark on the most dangerous path either of them had ever chosen. In 3 days, they would return to the Midnight Archives. And, after that, nothing would ever be the same. 3 days later, Elena stood before the hidden panel in the Prague bookshop, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the Shadow Council symbol. Beside her, Damien's jaw was set in a hard line, his red eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and terror that matched her own feelings. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "We can still walk away from this." Elena shook her head. "We have come too far to turn back now." The journey down into the Midnight Archives felt different this time. The magical energies that surrounded them seemed more intense, more personal, as if the ancient forces that governed the underground chamber could sense the momentous decision they had made. Countess Morgana was waiting for them in the same spot where they had first met her, but she was not alone. 3 other figures stood beside her, all wearing the black robes that marked them as members of the Shadow Council. Their faces were hidden, but Elena could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. "Welcome back, Your Majesties," Morgana said with a smile that was equal parts welcoming and predatory. "Have you reached a decision?" "We have," Elena said, stepping forward before Damien could speak. "I choose to undergo the regeneration spell." One of the robed figures whispered something in a language that Elena did not recognize, and Morgana nodded slowly. "Are you certain? Once the ritual begins, there is no stopping it. The life force transfer cannot be reversed or interrupted." "I am certain," Elena replied, though her heart was pounding so hard that she was sure everyone in the chamber could hear it. "Very well," Morgana said, gesturing for them to follow her deeper into the archives. "Come. We have prepared everything you will need." They walked through a maze of impossible corridors, past shelves filled with books that seemed to write themselves and artifacts that glowed with their own inner light. Elena tried not to think about what she was about to sacrifice, tried to focus instead on the potential outcome. Damien cured of his sterility, their kingdom saved from destruction, their marriage restored to what it had once been.
Finally, they arrived at a circular chamber that Elena had not seen during their first visit. The walls were covered with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly, and in the center of the room stood a raised platform made from what looked like black marble veined with silver.
This is the altar of renewal, Morgana explained, her voice taking on a formal, ceremonial tone. It has been used for regeneration magic since the earliest days of vampire civilization. Many great healings have taken place here, though few as significant as what we attempt tonight. Elena studied the altar, noting the channels carved into its surface that seemed designed to contain and direct magical energy. There were no obvious bloodstains or signs of violence, but something about the ancient stone made her skin crawl with apprehension. "How does the ritual work?" Damien asked, his voice tight with tension. "The process is complex but straightforward," Morgana replied, producing a leather-bound tome from the folds of her robes. "Queen Elena will lie upon the altar while I perform the incantations that will open the pathways between her life force and your damaged reproductive organs. The transfer will take approximately 1 hour, during which time both of you will experience significant pain." "What kind of pain?" Elena asked. "For you, it will feel as though your very essence is being drawn out of your body through every pore," Morgana explained clinically. "For His Majesty, it will feel as though his internal organs are being rebuilt from the inside out. Because, in a sense, that is exactly what will be happening." Elena swallowed hard, trying to imagine enduring an hour of the kind of agony that Morgana was describing. "And after the hour is over?" "If all goes well, the king's sterility will be cured, and you will have aged the equivalent of 50 to 75 years of."